Hey guys, what's up? So this week we are going to be talking about the sexual arousal and response cycle, physiology, the process of what affects it, and so on, etc., etc. Alright, so when we are talking about arousal, arousal does not mean you're turned on. Arousal simply means that the systems in the body have been activated. So you actually have all sorts of different types of arousal. Sexual arousal is just one specific type of activation of the body. You're aroused when you're angry. Doesn't mean you're turned on, turned on, but you have adrenaline released, your heart's pumping harder, and so on. So all of the systems have been activated beyond normal functioning. If you are really happy, you're also aroused. Again, that does not mean that you're sexually aroused. You are just aroused in another type of bodily activation. Okay, so sexual arousal is specifically the activations that happen in the body when you are turned on. So we need to start with the brain. What are the physical structures in the brain that are affecting our sexual response and arousal? So we're looking at two general locations of the brain, two general areas of the brain, the cerebral cortex and the limbic system. Now this is very general, it's so much more specific than this, but I don't want to torture you with all the biological details. When you take biology, or if you take human physiology, then you will learn this in much greater detail. But basically the cerebral cortex is our higher mental processes, it's our logical thinking part of the brain, or lack thereof, depending on who we're talking about. And it helps us to think things through. Okay? The limbic system is much more emotional. Some scientists will call it like the lizard part of our brain because lizards specifically have a very developed limbic system and basically no cerebral cortex. They don't do a lot of thinking. The limbic system is responsible for like our life support. It keeps us breathing and keeps the basic body functioning. And it's in the center part of the brain. And that makes sense because you could lose some of your ability to think, but if you lose the ability to breathe, if your brain is damaged, then you're really in trouble. Okay, so the brain is designed so that the less necessary parts of survival are the more vulnerable, the outside area, and the really important life support systems are tucked inside the brain and much better protected. So it's a really good design. By the way, your brain also sits in like this pocket of liquid, and if you get whiplash from a car accident, then that liquid helps to stop your brain from slamming against the skull. So there's all sorts of protective mechanisms like an air cushion, water cushion inside of your skull. All right, I don't know why I just have all these random trivia things popping up. Did you know that woodpeckers, their tongue, when they pull it back into their head, actually wraps around their brain so that when they're banging their head against a tree, the tongue is also protecting the brain and the skull from too much impact. So just a bunch of random trivia today. So the limbic system is very involved in sexual functioning because again, that's the emotional kind of just basic physical mechanisms located in the limbic system. However, that does not mean the cerebral cortex is not involved in sexuality. If the cerebral cortex wasn't involved, then there would be no thinking involved in sex whatsoever, and we know that thinking is a big part of sex. You think about what turns you on. The way you analyze a situation, you can be afraid of sex or you can be excited about sex. If it's a stranger wanting to have sex with you is a very different situation than the love of your life wanting to have sex with you. Okay, so everything, the emotional and the intellectual part of the brain, both very involved in sexuality. Now, neurotransmitters are not an area of the brain, they're a chemical in the brain that helps to send messages. Hopefully you've learned this already. Dopamine is one of the big ones. Dopamine and serotonin are really the two big names in sexuality, although certainly there are many more neurotransmitters involved. Dopamine gives you a feeling of reward, I had this goal and dopamine is going to be released if I get there, and dopamine's actually released the closer I get to my goal, and so now I really want to achieve my goal. And some people who aren't willing to work hard, they actually don't have a lot of dopamine release, and so dopamine keeps you from being lazy. And dopamine also makes you want to have sex. Okay? And serotonin makes you feel good, makes you feel happy, gives you energy, and it It's interesting because even though your book says that dopamine facilitates and serotonin inhibits sexual arousal, it's kind of, it kind of goes both ways. Like, if you don't have enough serotonin, then you're depressed and you're not interested in sex. If you don't have enough dopamine, you don't have that goal-oriented behavior, and so sex just doesn't seem worth the effort. On the other hand, if you have too much dopamine, then like it can cause all sorts of physical and mental health problems. So anyhow, we'll talk more about another neurotransmitter later, oxytocin. It's a really powerful one involved in sexuality, but we'll get there in a few slides. All right, hormones. Let's talk about hormones. So we have male hormones, we have female hormones. So men have testosterone, women have estrogen. Except women also have testosterone and men also do have estrogen. It's just, we say testosterone is male because men have more of it than women do usually, and women usually have more estrogen than testosterone. So it's not really like one or the other, it's just who has more of it than another one. Testosterone is in the androgen family, which is a type of steroid hormone produced by the testes, adrenal glands, and the ovaries, okay? So women produce testosterone in their ovaries. Estrogen is produced by the ovaries and the testes. So men are producing estrogen in their body. Estrogen is also produced by fat. So the more fat you have on your body, the more estrogen is getting produced, which is why when men are obese, they tend to develop a little bit too much mammary tissue, and just like women do, because estrogen stimulates mammary tissue to develop. Yeah, so estrogen is being produced by both men and women. And then, like I said, we're going to talk about oxytocin, the neurotransmitter, but we'll get to that in a few slides. Now, ovulation and sexuality are very linked, and I'm going to talk more about how for women, the hormonal cycles are very linked to our sexuality. When we are about to ovulate, women actually have increased sexual fantasy. So we think about sex much more pre-ovulation. Now, you have to remember the purpose of the reproductive system is to reproduce, right? Doesn't seem surprising, and yet people are very surprised when they get pregnant. But that's the goal of your reproductive system. So when you are about to ovulate, that is the perfect time to have sex in order to get pregnant. The sperm lasts for about 7 days in the body. The egg only lasts for 24 hours, so it would be better to get some sperm into the system before ovulation to make sure it's there and you don't miss that 24-hour window of opportunity. So your body is actually trying to get you to have sex right before ovulation and through ovulation. And then when ovulation's over, it doesn't matter if you're having sex because you can't get pregnant. So your body does all sorts of things to make women more interested in sex when they are about to ovulate and during ovulation. That is when women are the most sexual. It's when they have the most energy, so they're more likely to go out and meet somebody or want to have sex. They fantasize about sex more. They are turned on more easily. If you look at when women masturbate, they're much more likely to masturbate in that window of ovulation than the rest of the month. Again, because that's when you should be wanting to be turned on, because that's when you can get pregnant. We also have an increased scent production. So scent is basically, and it's interesting because the biology department at Victor Valley College is doing scent research, so they are proving this, that scent is composed of genetic markers that kind of float through the air, and then you smell those genetic markers, and somehow in your brain recognizes this person is genetically appropriate for me to make babies with, and then your brain says, go find that person. So you produce more scent as a woman when you are about to ovulate, so that your scent can travel further and can attract a man. And men, even though your scent isn't increasing, her sense of smell increases during that time period, so she is more likely to smell you and be attracted to you, okay? So it's all about getting her pregnant during that time of the month. Ladies, this is for you. Guys, if you want to answer this, feel free, but this is for the ladies. Who is more attractive to you, this clean-shaven guy or the rough, scruffy 5 o'clock shadow guy? If you answered the 5 o'clock shadow, you are probably in your ovulation window, okay? So I don't know why it is that research has shown women are more attracted to facial hair during the ovulation window. So if you can get pregnant, you're interested in a guy who's scruffy. If you can't get pregnant, it's not ovulation window, then you are more attracted to the clean baby face shaved guy. One theory is that the facial hair signifies the guy's producing more testosterone, therefore he's stronger, he's more able to protect you and your children. So it could be a mechanism that's built into us that we should have babies with somebody who can protect them and keep them and me and you alive. Also, if you are postmenopausal, so now you can't have babies, the preference for the scruffy guy decreases tremendously. So women who can no longer have children prefer the clean shaven look. Men, your hormones also shift when you are anticipating sex. Testosterone increases, more testosterone, the more sex drive. Married men have lower testosterone the more time they spend with their wife, and also literally at the end of the day of spending a day with the wife, your testosterone levels are lower than in the morning when you woke up, okay? Now, this does not mean like your testosterone levels have dropped so dramatically you're no longer a man. It just means that like testosterone like has decreased just a little bit, significantly, but just a little bit. And so a lot of men, assuming you have a good relationship, they kind of report that they feel like the edge has been taken off. They don't feel quite as competitive. They don't feel quite as aggressive. They feel a little bit more peaceful and calm, and that's one of the big advantages for men in marriage. You're actually, if you're married, research shows that you're happier on average, you're wealthier on average, you live longer on average, and you get more sex if you're married than single. Okay, so men, keep that in mind. Women's happiness does not actually increase tremendously with marriage. Although your health does, and the length of your life on average does increase, and your income increases. So there are definitely benefits to marriage. So don't believe Hollywood when they make it sound like every marriage is miserable. That's actually not what the research shows. Anyhow, let's talk about oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is not a hormone, it's a neurotransmitter. And this is the chemical structure of oxytocin. Now, it says this is love because oxytocin is what we call the cuddle hormone. When oxytocin is released, you feel closer to the people around you. You feel more trusting. You feel like there's a relationship there. And so oxytocin is like the love chemical. It gives you a feeling of being loved and loving another person. Men, you produce oxytocin, not as much as women. You actually produce more of, oh shoot, what is it called? Why didn't I write this down on the PowerPoint slide? Vasopressin? Yeah, vasopressin. So vasopressin causes a sense of protectiveness. In a study with prairie voles, which are kind of like a squirrel thing, they are not monogamous. They don't stay with the female after they breed. And they gave the male prairie vole vasopressin, and the vole then stayed with the mom and helped build the nest and bring food and take care of the babies and everything. So vasopressin causes protectiveness in men. Oxytocin causes connection and love, feelings of love. So, and that's in both men and women. So when is oxytocin released? Oxytocin is released a little bit when you hold hands. It's released when you hug, but after 20 seconds of hugging. And it's interesting, right? You have to hug for 20 seconds for oxytocin to be released. So I did this once in a class with students where two students, they volunteered. I didn't make them hug, but so they're like, okay, we're gonna hug and we're gonna make oxytocin be released. And so, okay, I'm gonna count, time the seconds. And 5 seconds, 10 seconds, fine, but like after 10 seconds it just started feeling awkward, and they were giggling and they're like, this is so weird. And literally when they hit 20 seconds they were like, oh, it's just like all of a sudden I just feel so relaxed and it's not that bad. And I'm like, well, you just hit 20 seconds. So that was the oxytocin being released. Just this weird chemical thing in our body. It's almost like it was designed that you don't want to be connected to a stranger or someone you don't know very well, and you're not going to hug a stranger for 20 seconds, right? When you hug a stranger, like if you go to church and they give hugs, which I hate that. When you go to church and someone gives you a hug, you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, hug, and then you're like, back off, okay, I don't know you, I don't want to hug you. So there's zero oxytocin being released in that situation. But if they forced you to hug them for 20 seconds, oxytocin would be released, and then you'd start feeling bonded to that person, which is not necessarily healthy. You don't know that person. You don't know whether they're trustworthy or not. So you don't want oxytocin to be released in that situation. Oxytocin is released when you stare into someone else's eyes, including your puppy dog's eyes, okay? When you stare into his cute little eyes, eventually after a few seconds it releases oxytocin, makes you feel connected, makes you feel good. Oxytocin is released when you breastfeed, and which is good because you should feel connected to your baby. Oxytocin is released when you give birth to the baby, which is also really important because you've had this parasite inside you for 9 months, living off of you, making you miserable, making you maybe sick for the entire 9 months, ruining your body, and then it causes you intense pain, and now you have to take care of it for the next 40 years. Because really, let's be honest, it's not 18, it's like 40 years or 50 years. And so you're supposed to want to do this, you're supposed to like this thing. So your body is programmed to release a flood of oxytocin in order to connect you to this baby so you don't just abandon it. And that's why women, they'll go through this horrible pain and they're like, I hate you, at their husband. And then all of a sudden the baby comes out and they're just like crying, it's the best thing that ever happened, I want another baby already. That's because of the oxytocin. Okay, so oxytocin it's almost fake love. It doesn't last very long, but it lasts just long enough to create an artificial bond, which in many situations is very important. It's vitally important. If you just had a baby, you need to be bonded to that thing immediately because it's not going to survive long without you. So that flood of oxytocin is vital to the survival of the human race. Like humans wouldn't exist at this point if it wasn't for oxytocin being released at childbirth. And this is also why a lot of parents who adopt feel like something's wrong, because they thought as soon as they received that baby, they would just have this overwhelming feeling of like, I'm your mother and you're my child, and you know, the angels come out and sing, and that doesn't happen, and they think something's wrong. Like this baby wasn't meant for me then because I should feel bonded to it. But they didn't have any oxytocin release. So of course you don't feel bonded to it, because a mom who gives birth, it's an artificial, like, fake bond. I mean, you had no time to develop a bond with this new human being. So you have this fake artificial chemical bond that gives you a sense of connection, a sense of love that hasn't been able to legitimately develop yet. So it's actually really normal for adoptive parents to not feel that bond. But over time, I mean, oxytocin is very short-lived, and then other chemicals give you the strong, true bond of true love that, you know, stands the test of time, sort of thing. Now, the other situation where a lot of oxytocin is released is orgasm, okay? So when you have sex with another person, a ton of oxytocin gets released. And you feel bonded, you feel a chemical, artificial love and connection and feeling of trust and rightness with this person whom you may not know from a hole in the ground. That's one of the scary things about having sex without a lot of judgment brought into the situation. I remember in college, I know exactly when one of my friends had sex with her boyfriend because, you know, on Tuesday, she'd be saying like, I don't know, what do you think about him? And I can't believe he did this the other day. I don't know if I'll keep dating him or not. And then the next day, you're like, oh, how'd the date go with that jerk that you're dating? And she'd be like, oh, I can't believe you'd say that. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. And if you can't support us, then we can't be friends, or whatever nonsense. Like, okay, you guys just had sex. Because there was an ability to see the issues literally the day before, and then all of a sudden, like, love is blind sort of thing. Oxytocin is what makes love blind. It takes away all logical thought and just gives you this intense feeling of bonding. And that's great if this is the right person for you. Like, if you're married, it's great if oxytocin gets released, right? Because you want, like, a little artificial bonding is great in marriage. But if this is just some dumb guy that you, or girl that you're like, I shouldn't even be with this person, but like, sex is fun, right? Let's admit it. So we're just gonna have sex. Well, you're not going to be able to keep separate, you know, your emotions separate from the relationship. And I hear people say that all the time. Oh, I'm just gonna have sex and I don't care about the relationship. I'm just in it for sex. Give it a little bit of oxytocin building up in your system and you won't be in it for sex anymore. You'll be married to this person and it'll be 10 years down the road and you are absolutely miserable, or you're in a domestic violence relationship. I'm a domestic violence counselor. I see this situation all the time. You're together because you had sex. And it's the oxytocin that is keeping you from seeing and admitting to the problems, because it's a chemical artificial bond. Makes you feel like this is right.